Sundays at the Fairchild house were always a well-oiled production, the kind that looked like it belonged in the glossy centerfold of a home and lifestyle magazine. My parents, Douglas and Marianne, had crafted a life that was all about polish. Nothing out of place, nothing left to chance. If you were driving by our colonial-style home on Alderwood Lane, you'd never know a storm had been building inside it for years. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and citrus on Sundays, Marianne's signature breakfast scent, something she borrowed from a Martha Stewart cookbook and claimed as her own. The sun streamed in through the windows she had scrubbed herself every Saturday morning, always in silence, as though cleanliness could scrub away deeper stains. Douglas sat at the head of the table, the Wall Street Journal folded just so, with a cup of black coffee that no one dared touch. Not even my sister. And speaking of my sister, the older one, the golden one, her name was Vanessa. She had a laugh that could charm strangers at the grocery store, and a way of walking into a room that made you feel like you owed her something. Vanessa always sat to Dad's right, as though that was the rightful order of the universe. Her napkin perfectly folded, her fork lifted just a second before everyone else's. Then there was the youngest, Clara. She used to sit across from Vanessa, but over time she started gravitating toward the far end of the table, near the window. She said she liked the light. I thought she just wanted to be left alone. Back then, I didn't question it. No one did. We were a picture-perfect family from the outside. Matching sweaters and Christmas photos. Summer trips to the coast, where we posed on docks and smiled like we didn't know the meaning of tension. Clara always smiled too, but there was a difference in her eyes. Like she was seeing something the rest of us didn't. Or maybe she just saw too clearly what the rest of us refused to admit. At dinner parties, guests would comment on how lucky Douglas and Marianne were to have two beautiful daughters. So close in age, yet so different, they'd laugh, sipping wine they didn't pay for. Dad would beam at Vanessa and say, "We couldn't ask for more." And Clara? She'd just reach for the bread basket, quietly refilling her plate. Our house was decorated in shades of beige and muted greens, like a place that didn't want to offend anyone. Mom was big on appearances. Dad was big on control. And Vanessa? She was the embodiment of their vision, refined, impressive, obedient. Clara, though, she was something else entirely. At the time, none of us knew how dangerous that could be. My mother had a gallery wall in the hallway, 12 silver frames arranged in exact symmetry, each one holding a memory she thought mattered most. Vanessa's ballet recital. Vanessa's Sweet 16. Vanessa with her first horse. Vanessa at her high school graduation, glowing in white, arms flung around our parents. And somewhere near the bottom right corner, half hidden by a sconce, there was Clara's 8th grade science fair photo. I once asked my mom why there weren't more pictures of Clara. She smiled and said, there just weren't as many moments worth framing. At the time, I thought nothing of it. That's the thing about being a part of something that's broken. You don't always see the cracks until you're already bleeding. From the outside, everything in our family operated like clockwork. Dad ran his logistics firm with the kind of precision that made him hard to argue with. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. One look over his glasses was enough to silence a room. Marianne kept the house spotless, the schedules organized, and the neighbors comfortably at arm's length. We were respectable. We were safe. And no one asked questions. Vanessa was always meant to be the showpiece. Private school, international internships, a curated resume before she could even drive. She was the kind of daughter you built a legacy around. Clara, on the other hand, read banned books in the back seat on family vacations and wore combat boots to church just to see the vein in Dad's temple twitch. She got straight A's but never told anyone. Built robots from scratch in her bedroom and didn't brag. Quiet, calculating, constantly underestimated. Clara didn't demand attention. She earned it, but rarely received it. She used to spend hours in the garage with a soldering iron, fixing broken electronics or tearing apart old cameras she found at thrift stores. I remember coming home once to find her sprawled out on the concrete floor, elbows deep in the guts of a VCR, grease on her cheek, muttering something about diode alignment. She looked up, squinted at me, and said, "Want to see something cool?" I didn't understand half of what she showed me, but I clapped anyway. When she turned 16, Clara asked for a microscope. Vanessa got a car. When Clara was accepted into 3 different engineering programs, our parents sent flowers to Vanessa for landing a public relations internship at her boyfriend's company. Again, no one said it aloud. But Clara wasn't the golden child. She was the placeholder, the shadow, the control variable in an experiment she didn't agree to participate in. And maybe that's why none of us saw it coming, how meticulous she was. How patient. She didn't shout when she was overlooked. She took notes. And brother, let me tell you, she took very good notes. There was a china cabinet in our dining room that only ever opened twice a year, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Marian kept it stocked with hand-painted porcelain plates passed down from her grandmother, each rimmed in delicate gold. No one ate off them. We simply placed them out, admired their elegance, and then tucked them away like secrets too fragile to handle. I used to think the cabinet was about tradition. Now I know it was about control. Growing up in the Fairchild house, there were rituals. You wore certain clothes for church, you didn't speak during the news, and you never corrected Dad at the dinner table, even if he got the details wrong. Vanessa was born understanding these rules. She glided through them like a figure skater on glass. Clara? She walked across them like a minefield, quietly, deliberately, but always aware of what could explode beneath her. We had money. Not the kind that made headlines, but enough to never worry. Douglas ran a distribution company that, to this day, I don't fully understand. Something about import channels and vendor routing. He made good money and kept a lot of things off paper. I didn't know that last part at the time, of course. That would come later. Vanessa had her own car by 17. A white Lexus with leather seats and a monogrammed keychain. Clara borrowed mine when I was home from college. She returned it with the tank full and the oil changed every time. I'd thank her, and she'd just shrug and go back to whatever project she was buried in that week. Marian always said Clara was independent. She said it like it was a flaw. Something to be corrected. She never bragged about Clara the way she did about Vanessa. If Clara published a short story in a college-lit magazine, Marian called it cute. If Vanessa got her photo taken at a networking event, it made the family newsletter. Our house had 3 guest bedrooms, but only one room that ever felt like Clara's, her basement workshop. She wasn't allowed to paint the walls or hang posters, but she filled it with gadgets, plans, and little piles of disassembled ambition. You'd walk in and see wires, blueprints, and notebooks filled with precise handwriting. She'd mutter equations under her breath and didn't care who heard her. Sometimes I'd find her asleep at her desk, an open laptop humming next to a cold cup of coffee. There was a distance growing between her and the rest of the family, but no one acknowledged it. It's easier not to look at what you've chosen to ignore. Clara started attending fewer dinners. Skipped family game nights. Missed holiday photo shoots. When asked, she always had a reason: midterms, a freelance coding project, a professor's seminar. Logical, believable, tidy. But I saw the way she flinched when Marian praised Vanessa for organizing a fundraiser, an event Clara had silently coded the RSVP software for. I noticed the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. She was collecting every slight, every omission. Not with anger. Not yet. But with clarity. She knew. She always knew. I used to think Clara was just quieter than the rest of us. More reserved, more self-contained. But looking back now, I realized that silence wasn't who she was, it was who she had to become. It started long before any of us noticed. Maybe before she even noticed. The kind of thing that doesn't show up all at once, but spreads like a stain, small, slow, and unmistakable once you finally see it. You can't unsee it after that. Clara wasn't just ignored. She was sidelined. Overlooked. Dismissed so regularly that I think part of her believed she didn't have the right to take up space. I remember when she turned 12. Vanessa had just gotten back from a summer program in DC for promising young leaders, and my parents threw a welcome back party. Dozens of people showed up. Balloons, catering, even one of those dumb, oversized banners with Vanessa's name on it. I asked what we were doing for Clara's birthday. Marian blinked at me like I'd just asked something impolite. Oh, she said, we'll do something simple. Clara doesn't really care for big events. They gave her a cake from the grocery store, no candles. She ate one slice in the kitchen, alone, while the rest of us toasted Vanessa's potential with champagne and speeches. When Clara got a perfect SAT score, it was met with a congratulatory text from Mom and a thumbs-up emoji from Dad. When Vanessa got a B+ in macroeconomics, my parents sent her flowers. The contrast was always there. Bright as day. But no one wanted to name it. She never asked for more. That was the worst part. She never demanded anything. While Vanessa expected gifts for merely existing, Clara earned everything and asked for nothing. She moved through our house like a guest, welcome but never quite wanted. I think the moment that finally opened my eyes was the Christmas dinner after Clara graduated college. Vanessa was in the middle of planning a trip to Bali with her fiancé, and the entire conversation revolved around that. Clara had landed a job at a major tech firm, one of those competitive spots where they only hire a handful of grads nationwide. She told us over dessert, almost hesitantly, like she was interrupting. No one even paused. Vanessa changed the subject back to flight reservations. That night, Clara stayed behind after everyone else left. I found her in the kitchen, stacking dishes with surgical precision. She didn't say anything, not right away. But her hands were shaking slightly. When I asked if she was okay, she just gave a tired smile and said, "I'm used to it." I didn't know what to say. She looked at me then, and it was the first time I saw it. Not sadness. Not anger. But a kind of clarity that scared me. A coldness behind the eyes of someone who'd stopped expecting things to change and had started calculating instead. That's the night I realized something dangerous was forming beneath Clara's quiet exterior. Something slow burning. Strategic. She had been writing her own story for years, in the margins of a family that never saw her. And every last one of us, had given her the ink. Clara stopped coming around as much after that Christmas. When she did, her visits were surgical, measured smiles, minimal small talk, eyes that never gave away what she was thinking. I don't know when she became so good at masking, but by the time I noticed, it was already too late to ask why. Marian chalked it up to Clara's job keeping her busy. Douglas barely noticed. And Vanessa? She seemed relieved. The fewer times Clara showed up, the more space Vanessa had to shine uninterrupted. I watched the shift happen gradually, like a photograph being overexposed, details fading in real time while no one looked closely enough to stop it. Clara used to sit at the table during Sunday dinners, offering dry commentary on Dad's business anecdotes and rolling her eyes at Vanessa's latest influencer ventures. Now she mostly hovered by the doorway, phone in hand, like she couldn't wait to leave. It was around this time that Vanessa got engaged. She met Ethan at a tech conference in San Francisco, ironically the same industry Clara worked in, but with very different results. Ethan was tall, charming, moneyed. The kind of man Marian had always envisioned for her daughter. The ring he gave Vanessa looked like it had its own zip code. The engagement dinner was a full production. Caterers, string quartet, designer centerpieces flown in from New York. Clara stood near the back, in a navy blue dress that probably meant something to her, but next to Vanessa's floor-length gown and radiant spotlight, she looked like a stagehand in her own family. I saw her slip away midway through the toast. I followed. She was on the balcony, leaning on the railing, staring down at the streetlights with that same quiet fury she never let anyone else see. "You okay?" I asked. She didn't look at me when she said, "They don't even pretend anymore." And she was right. No one even tried to hide it. Vanessa could do no wrong. Marian called her our miracle. Douglas referred to her as the family's legacy. Every conversation revolved around Vanessa's wedding, her career, her curated life of filtered perfection. Clara was mentioned once that night, when someone asked her to take a group photo. A few days later, I called her. Just to check in. She answered after 3 rings. "Hey," she said, flat but polite. I asked her if she was okay. She paused for a moment and then replied, "Don't worry. I'm not upset." But she wasn't okay. I could hear it in the tone. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't jealousy. It was something colder, sharper. The emotional equivalent of sharpening a blade in a locked room. "I've stopped trying to matter to them," she added. "It's been liberating." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time after that. Because I realized something. Clara hadn't just accepted her place outside the family spotlight. She was preparing to burn the whole stage down. The wedding planning took over the house like ivy, slow, creeping, and impossible to ignore. By spring, there wasn't a single surface in my parents' home that wasn't covered in bridal magazines, swatches of satin, or embossed invitations so thick they could double as coasters. Vanessa had become something between a bride and a monarch. Every detail of the ceremony was her edict, every decision her divine right. And Douglas and Marianne? They were intoxicated by it all. "This will be the event of the year," Mom kept saying, like she was being scouted by town and country. One night, over dinner, I made the mistake of asking if Clara was helping with the planning. The air shifted. Vanessa didn't even look up from her salad. "She's not coming," she said casually, like it was weather. I blinked. "What do you mean she's not coming?" "She's your sister." Vanessa finally looked at me, her expression as calm as ever. "Clara doesn't exactly fit the aesthetic." The word hit harder than I expected. "Aesthetic?" I repeated, incredulous. "She's not a centerpiece. She's your family." Vanessa shrugged. "The photographer's shooting for an editorial spread. The guest list's tight. Clara would be out of place." Marianne jumped in to soften the blow, or at least attempt to. "You know how Clara is, always uncomfortable at these things. We thought it would be best for everyone." "We." Not she. Not Vanessa decided. "We." And that's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an oversight. It was a decision, calculated, deliberate, cruel. I called Clara that night. She picked up on the first ring. "They told you?" she asked. Her voice was steady. Not broken. Not even bitter. Just knowing. "Yeah," I said. "They said you didn't fit the aesthetic." Silence. And then she laughed. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't loud. It was quiet and dry, like air escaping a tire. A sound with no room for hope left in it. "Do you want to know the best part?" she said. "What?" I offered to help. I offered to design the digital invites, build a custom wedding website, automate the RSVP tracking. You know, useful things. Vanessa said they already had someone for that. She paused, then added, "She said I wouldn't photograph well next to her." I could barely speak. Clara wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't rattled. But I could hear something shift beneath her voice. Like a wire tightening. "They don't want me at the wedding," she said, "because I'd ruin the illusion. And that's fine. They've built their house of cards. I'm just the wind." There was a finality in her voice. A quiet storm. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. Something had broken open in her. Not in the way that leads to collapse. In the way that leads to retaliation. Clara didn't spiral. She didn't text me long rants or cry over the phone or beg for inclusion like some desperate afterthought. No, what she did was far more terrifying. She went quiet. Methodical. Like a lab tech prepping for a volatile experiment. The next time I saw her, maybe 2 weeks out from the wedding, she was a woman transformed. She invited me to her apartment, a third-floor walk-up in a gentrifying neighborhood full of industrial brick and steel beams. The place was sharp, minimalist, functional, immaculate. You could feel the clarity in it, the sense of ownership and purpose. Her dining table had been cleared off and turned into a makeshift war room, files, blueprints, spreadsheets, a laptop open to what looked like tax records. I recognized the family business logo in the corner of the screen, Fairchild Logistics. She didn't offer me coffee. She didn't waste time. "I need you to listen," she said, flipping open a folder. "I've spent the last 6 months compiling everything. Every tax evasion scheme. Every offshore account. Every contractor my father paid under the table." My throat went dry. Clara, what is this? She slid a document across the table, a list of vendor invoices paid in cash, amounts broken into irregular chunks. This is how he's been funneling unreported income through shell vendors. It's been happening for years. I traced it back through company filings. There's a reason Dad's always told us to stay out of the numbers. My hands hovered over the paper. It wasn't that I didn't believe her. It's that I hadn't dared to think it. She looked at me then, eyes hard, voice even. They built a castle out of lies. And now they want to parade Vanessa through the front gate like royalty while I'm left outside the moat. There was no fury in her tone. That would have made it easier to dismiss. No, this was cooler than rage. It was strategy. Purpose. I'm filing a report with the IRS this week, she said. But I'm not stopping there. Vanessa's wedding is scheduled for the 22nd, right? I nodded slowly, already feeling the weight of what she was about to say. On the 22nd, she said, tapping the folder, instead of walking down an aisle, my father is going to be handed a subpoena. And I'll make sure the timing is public. There will be no wedding. There will be court. I stood there, stunned, torn between awe and disbelief. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, she said. She turned her laptop around. On the screen was a password-protected drive labeled Family Ledger. Inside, I saw subfolders, emails, financial docs, whistleblower contacts. And then another folder titled simply, Theft. What's that? I asked. Clara's eyes didn't move from mine. It's everything I've found that Dad's been hiding under my name. Old bank accounts he opened while I was in college. A credit card tied to my social. Assets shuffled around to avoid taxes. He stole from me. Not just attention or praise money. Real money. My stomach turned. She clicked open a spreadsheet. There it was, thousands of dollars in contributions moved through a trust in her name, but never touched by her. Clara had receipts. She had it all. I finally found my voice. Why now? She didn't hesitate. Because they made it clear what I am to them, an accessory they don't like enough to wear. They didn't just cut me out. They told me I was a liability to their image. So now I'm going to ruin it. I sat back in my chair, stunned. She had done it. She had taken years of pain, neglect, dismissal, and turned it into a dossier. And she wasn't angry anymore. She was ready. 2 weeks after the implosion at the vineyard, the Fairchild name was etched into the docket of the county courthouse like a brand that wouldn't fade. The headlines had already done their damage. Socialite's wedding canceled amid federal tax fraud investigation. Fairchild Logistics under audit after shocking subpoena. The family had gone from enviable to radioactive in under 48 hours. But that was only the prologue. Clara had saved the good part for court. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early, habit mostly, but also curiosity. I wanted to see it unfold. The reckoning. The correction of balance. Clara was already there, seated with her attorney, wearing a navy suit that made her look like the executioner no one saw coming. She didn't look at our parents when they entered. She didn't need to. Douglas was a shell of himself, unshaven, suit slightly wrinkled, the knot in his tie loose in a way that would have disgusted him just weeks earlier. Marianne looked even worse. Gone was the woman who once curated every public appearance. Her hair was pulled back in a rushed bun, her face hollowed out from sleepless nights and decaying denial. Vanessa didn't come. Rumor was she hadn't left her apartment since the failed wedding and had already lawyered up, just in case. The judge entered, and the room shifted. Tension thick enough to bite into. Clara's attorney opened with a statement that felt more like a scalpel than a speech. Methodical, measured, lethal. Your Honor, this is not merely a tax discrepancy. This is a pattern. A deliberate system of financial manipulation. Mr. Fairchild used his daughter's name, my client's name, to obscure assets, launder untaxed income, and funnel money through fraudulent trust accounts. The exhibits came next. Documents, spreadsheets, bank statements, all with Clara's name, all manipulated by Douglas's signature hand. Every file was time-stamped, cross-referenced, and devastating. When it was Clara's turn to speak, she stood with a stillness that could silence wind. For years, she said, Voice steady but resonant, I was treated like the invisible child. But I wasn't. I was useful. I was the name they used when it suited them, the placeholder for financial convenience, the paper shield. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't fight back. She looked directly at the judge then, not tearful, not angry, but grounded. I noticed. And I am. There was a beat of silence in the courtroom that hummed like electricity. Then Douglas's lawyer stood and did what defense attorneys do, blamed clerical errors, miscommunications, insisted there was no intent to defraud. But the evidence was too precise. The paper trail Clara had assembled too damning. When the judge delivered his ruling, it felt like gravity returning to a world that had floated in imbalance for too long. Douglas was to pay back over $150,000 in penalties and fines, including damages to Clara. Restitution for stolen assets, falsified trust usage, and years of fraudulent financial reporting. His business would be audited. His assets frozen until further notice. Clara didn't gloat. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just turned, gathered her folders, and walked out of the courtroom. And me? I followed her. Because as much as I had once been blind to it all, I wasn't going to miss another second of the history she was writing for herself. Outside the courthouse, she finally looked at me. The afternoon sun cut a clean line across her face. I didn't just want justice, she said. I wanted them to feel what it's like to be powerless. I nodded, unsure what to say. She gave me a small smile, thin, but real. They tried to write me out, she said. So I rewrote the ending. It would have been enough to win in court. Most people would have stopped there, after the ruling, after the fines, after the family name had been dragged through every headline and dinner party whisper for miles. But Clara wasn't most people. She didn't want scraps. She wanted resolution. And more than that, she wanted leverage. 2 days after the judgment, Clara filed a motion to freeze the remaining Fairchild Logistics accounts until a full audit was completed. Not just Douglas's main books, but the shadow subsidiaries, the shell companies, the consulting fees, and contractor disbursements that had hidden more than just tax evasion. It was surgical, brutal, unapologetic. And as I sat across from her in her apartment again, different day, same war room table, I realized Clara wasn't tying up loose ends. She was cutting the final thread. I went deeper, she said, sliding a thumb drive toward me. After the subpoena, I knew Dad would panic. Start moving money. So I let him. The drive contained 3 months' worth of digital breadcrumbs. Clara had quietly installed tracking software on a family desktop years ago. Nothing malicious, just a backup program linked to her own cloud. She'd never turned it off. So when Douglas logged in to shift funds from his emergency reserve account, she saw every click. He tried to bury what was left in a crypto wallet under a holding company in Nevada. It's gone now. I stared at her. Gone how? I transferred it. Legally. The trust was under my name, remember? Clara, I breathed. How much? She leaned back in her chair, expression unreadable. About 60,000. Enough for what I need. What do you need? I asked, though part of me already knew. To disappear from them. For good. Clara had signed the papers that morning, legal separation of family trust ownership, withdrawal from the estate, and a cease and desist against using her name in any future business correspondence. She'd also filed a civil suit against Vanessa for defamation, citing the emails she uncovered, messages Vanessa sent to business partners and wedding vendors calling Clara unbalanced, a liability, and financially unstable. They wanted me gone, Clara said. So I'm giving them what they wanted. But on your terms. She nodded. This time, I get to leave with the crown jewels. Later that week, I heard from a mutual friend that Vanessa and Marianne had tried to schedule a family healing dinner. A public reconciliation. One last attempt to salvage what was left of the brand. Clara sent a reply through her attorney. I don't attend performances I didn't audition for. By the end of the month, the Fairchild house went up for sale. The official statement called it downsizing. Everyone knew better. The estate, once the backdrop for curated family Christmas cards and charity galas, was just another asset now. Another casualty. Clara? She moved out of state. Bought a townhouse on the edge of a quiet tech corridor where nobody knew her name and no one expected her to play second to anyone. She kept the suit from court. Said it reminded her of who she'd become. And she left something else behind, too. The wedding dress. Not Vanessa's. The one Clara bought herself on a whim years ago, when she thought she might one day have her own version of a big day. She'd kept it tucked in her closet, tags still on, silent and white like a hope she never voiced. She left it folded on our parents' front porch the morning they were forced to vacate the house. No note. No explanation. Just a reminder, this could have been something beautiful. A year later, I visited Clara. Her new place was nothing like where we grew up. No chandeliers, no antique rugs or curated faux warmth. Just clean lines, soft earth tones, and silence that didn't feel heavy. It wasn't just a new address. It was a declaration. Every square foot belonged to her. Every detail was her choice. She met me at the door barefoot, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Same black blend she'd always liked. She hadn't aged a day, but she looked different. Not lighter, exactly. Stronger. Like she had taken all that weight, melted it down, and reforged it into armor. Nice place, I said, stepping inside. She smiled. It's mine. There was no trace of the Fairchild name anywhere. Not on her mailbox, not on her diplomas, not on the stack of legal filings she kept in a sleek black folder tucked neatly on a shelf. Just one framed photograph on the mantel, a picture of her, mid-laugh, sitting on the hood of her first junker car. The one she drove into the ground while Vanessa got leather seats and backup cameras. That photo? That was her new portrait. The only one that ever mattered. I thought you'd like to know, she said, sipping her coffee. Dad had to liquidate 3 accounts to pay off the final settlement. The audit's still ongoing. And Vanessa? Clara shrugged. Last I heard, she's trying to relaunch her lifestyle brand as a resilience coach. Monetizing the meltdown. I laughed. She didn't. Let her, she said. The ones who live off illusions always think they can spin a new one. But the internet doesn't forget. We sat in the quiet for a while. She told me about her job, private consulting for a cybersecurity firm. Remote, well-paying, respected. She worked when she wanted, turned down contracts when she didn't. No one there knew about the wedding or the trial. No one whispered liability when she walked into a room. As I listened, I realized something. Clara hadn't just escaped them. She had replaced them with her own version of stability, her own metrics of success. Her own identity, sharpened by the blade of every injustice they ever served her. Before I left, I asked her one last question. Do you ever think about going back? About making peace with them? She tilted her head, considering. I made peace, she said. Just not with them. Then she walked me to the door. The sunlight hit her just right, and for the first time in all the years I'd known my sister, she looked complete. As I stepped outside, I noticed something on her mailbox. A small sticker, barely visible unless you were looking for it. It read, "No forwards. Return to sender." That, I realized, said everything. Clara hadn't just gotten revenge. She'd erased the old story and started her own. On her terms. In her voice. With her name. And that, more than any courtroom victory or stolen spotlight, was her greatest act of defiance. Her real win.